Thanks, Daniel, and happy Valentine's Day. I guess a few months ago, none of us really thought that this would be how we would be spending Valentine's Day lunch. But there we are, we're here now, so let's make the most of it. Now, we've been going through in these series of talks over the last 4 days, and now we're finishing today with the fifth talk. We've been covering a number of issues: relevance on the first day, truth on the second day, tolerance on the third day, pleasure yesterday, and finally we're landing on this issue of identity. What am I worth? Who am I? What am I worth? How do we constitute our identity? And I want to kind of break it down in three ways over our time before we give you a chance to respond with question and answer. It's worth saying, by the way, at the end, I'm very happy to stay around, and if you haven't had your question answered or you had occurred to you in the Q&A, do come and grab me. I'd love to chat to you further, and I'll try and make as much time available as possible. But we're going to try and break this question down in three ways. We're going to look, first of all, at the need for a source of identity. Secondly, we're going to look at the inadequacy of the sources of our identity. And finally, we're going to look at Jesus Christ as a unique source of identity. So that's where we're going. Now, I don't know if you can remember, but a number of years ago, Head & Shoulders had an advert with quite a catchy and clever slogan on it. It said, "You never get a second chance to make a first impression." It was obviously a number of years ago because, as you can observe, I haven't been observing shampoo adverts for some years now, for obvious reasons. But there was something clever with that slogan, because it tapped into a fear, I think, that all of us have. And if you're a fresher, that will be quite real for you. This happened in the last year. When you arrive into a new situation, how do you set out the stall of who you are? What do people think of you? What constitutes your identity? How do you kind of work that out? I don't know if you've noticed, but one of the ways that we kind of put on the table, who we are and what constitutes our identity, is we do it by just subtly dropping it into conversation. That thing that we kind of, we really hold to, and we think, that's like my trump card in the room. I'll play the trump card. So one of the great ways that it works in British society anyway is that in conversation we have this thing called reciprocity. So if I ask you a question, unless you're terribly rude and not very well educated at all, you will reciprocate and ask me the same question back. So this is how it works, and I think we all do this. So, you'll go away from me, you'll be at a party, no one knows who you are, you'll wander into the party, and you'll be chatting to someone over a drink, doing the small talk thing, and what do you say? Here comes the question: where do you go to university? And they turn around to you and say something like, I go to University of Nottingham. You say, Nottingham, that's a great university. Sincere, kind, understated. Then it moves on a little bit, you talk about Nottingham, you try to not be condescending, and then they turn around to you and they say something like, and where do you go to university? Feign bashfulness. Oh, man. Oxford. Oh, Oxford Brookes? No, I mean, no. The other place, down the hill. That's how it works, isn't it? And what you've done in that moment, and immediately it's like something inside you just kind of takes a sigh of relief, and you go, and I've put on the table my identity. You feel more secure, you feel less vulnerable. Now, for a lot of people, that was, I kind of make a bit of fun about it, but we actually do things like that, and it's well documented by psychologists and sociologists how we do that. And I think it's kind of captured, this tension of identity is captured in kind of two phrases that we hear a lot in our society. One is, just be yourself. We hear a lot, just be yourself, or be true to yourself, which implies, of course, that there is a coherent identity for each one of us that we need to realize or actualize or fulfill. Just be yourself. On the other level, we have certain phrases like, make up your mind about who you're going to be, or this is a career-defining moment, or this is a defining moment, or make something of yourself. And you see, those type of phrases imply that our identity is not yet formed and that we're able to form it depending on what we choose or what we do or how we live. Now, the problem is that both of those have their shortfalls. So if, for example, you are saying, well, just be yourself, that implies that there is already a coherent identity. In which case, where did you get that from? Did you have any choice in forming it? Because if there is a you that's already formed and you've just got to be true to that, then that, in some sense, defines who you are. It's there, it's rigid, it's, you can't do anything with that. Your identity is set, and that feels quite constraining. But on the other hand, if you're able to kind of make something of yourself, that is, you construct your identity, well, then that implies that there is no coherent you, that you are just a kind of blank canvas. There is no real or ultimate you. And that's a bit unnerving as well. So whichever way we go with identity, we've got some issues on the table. Is there a coherent us? And if so, does that constrain us? If there's no coherent us, then who am I really? And how do I realize that and work that out? That's just some of the difficulties that we have when it comes to identity. Now, a philosopher who spoke a lot about this is Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher. And one of his big kind of questions was what it means to form our identity. And he explored a lot some of the difficulties of the different ways in which people form their identity. He said this: the self has the task of becoming itself. That sounds very wise, doesn't it? It's the type of things you think, I came to Oxford to hear someone say that to me. The self has the task of becoming itself. What he was saying is, he's saying what's unique about human beings is that we have this task of working out who we are. No other animal does that. You don't find dogs wandering along in a great existential angst about who they are. Cats, maybe. Dogs, definitely not. But human beings are unique because, we're trying to work out who we are. The self has the task to construct our identity. How inadequate our normal ways of constructing our identity are. And secondly, he explores that God alone is only adequate to give us our identity. It's quite interesting where he goes with that. Let me give you a quote from him as well, where he's exploring the inadequacy of the ways we try to construct our identity. He wrote this: the greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. No other loss occurs so quietly. Any other loss, an arm, a leg, $5, a wife, etc., is sure to be noticed, but not this. He's saying there's a danger that as we go about constructing our identity, if we get it wrong, if we don't really understand what it means to be who we are, we can lose a sense of self, and it will happen imperceptibly, quietly, but it's a very significant, devastating loss nonetheless. And I just want us to think about that for the rest of our time. So let's try and explore the inadequacy of the sources of our identity. The inadequacy of the source of our identity. It's interesting, when you look back at traditional societies, they had certain well-formed ways of understanding who people are and who they are. So some of it would be related to your family, it might be related to your job, or your position in society, or it might be related to your status in society. And you get that, actually, when you start to think about some of our kind of more well-worn English names. So, for example, Davidson or Jackson as a name is son of David or son of Jack. And so you're getting your identity, therefore, from who precedes you in your family tree. Interestingly now, despite the fact that we've kind of moved on from traditional values like that, the second most searched item on all of our search engines is about family genealogies now. Second behind pornography. But second behind pornography is genealogies. I'm not quite sure what that says about the human race. We've been looking a little bit over the lunchtimes. But isn't that astonishing that actually, as we kind of are more modern people, we still have a great longing for that connection to know who are we? David's son of David or daughter of David, related to our family tree, trying to get some sense of identity from our past. Then, of course, you have identities constituted by your job. So, for example, you have Miller, don't you, or Smith, which implies that is your job and that defines who you are. Then you have it implied by your status or your role in society. So, for example, the name, less common, but Masterton, master of the town, right? You were the master of the town. And once one person has been master of the town, forever your family is known as being, associated to the master of the town. Now, modern people kind of take that and we say, well, the problem with that is it's impossible to change your stars. It's just very constraining, isn't it? If I'm defined by my family, what if I don't like my family tree? Interestingly, there's been some rather powerful stories of people who've dug into their family tree and realized, some tragic things about who their family are and have wanted to hide it. Because if something has happened in your family tree you're not happy with, does that define who you are? Or your job? Am I ever better than a Smith? Can I be better than that? I'm sorry if your name is Smith. I'm sure you are better than a Smith. But, that's the problem of traditional societies. Or, your status, your position in society. And, of course, this is the foundation of the, traditional class system. know your place. Very stratified, very clear. And of course, we as postmodern people, if you want to call yourself that, look at that and think, well, that's just very constraining. There's no liberty there for me to, change and become my own person. So what do we come up with? Well, postmodern or modern sources of identity are kind of interesting because what we go with are things like career and popularity or education or achievement or looks. And so we say, well, I'm going to constitute my identity on the basis of those things. My favorite film is Chariots of Fire. It's a brilliant, brilliant film, even though it's getting a bit dated now. Do watch it because it explores this issue of, what it means to be a person. Who are we? And one of the climactic moments in the film is when Harold Abrahams, who's an athlete competing at the Olympic Games and is always striving to prove himself, he's just about to compete in the 100 meters at the Olympics. And he turns to his friend in the change room and he says these famous words. He says, I have 10 lonely seconds to justify my existence. He's saying, life has come to this. Here I am, this one moment, 10 lonely seconds to justify my existence. He says, this is going to define who I am. And often we feel like that. I don't know whether you feel like that with Oxford. Maybe you're kind of aware of your finals coming up and you're thinking, my finals and the grade that I get will define me. Now, you might not want to put it that way, but I wonder if deep down psychologically part of the stress that we feel about exams is because that's what's going on. See, when we make something like our academic performance or our sporting performance or our career or our beauty or our popularity, what defines me, my source of identity, then there's a real problem with it. And I think the problems come on two levels. First of all, they're far too insecure. They're far, far too insecure. Now, we need a secure source of identity because otherwise, if my identity is waxing and waning like the tides, then it means that one day I'll feel great about myself, the other day I'll feel self-loathing, I'll feel horrendous about myself. We need a kind of consistent, coherent identity that is not going to shift like sand. I remember a few years ago when the credit crunch first hit, I was talking to a good friend of mine who worked in the city for a large bank, and he'd been let go with the credit crunch. And it was interesting, as I was talking to him, he's a Christian guy, he turned to me and he said, the problem is, Pete, it's not just that I've lost my job. He said, the problem is that since I've lost my job, I just don't feel like I know who I am anymore. Now, listen to what he's saying. I just don't feel like I know who I am anymore. What he's saying is, my identity was bound up in my job and in my career. And now because that has been taken away from me, I've lost a part of me. I've lost a sense of my identity. I remember also a year or so ago talking to a girl. She was an attractive girl, early 30s. She'd had a lot of kind of relationships when she was younger, but as she'd got a little bit older, she'd found it difficult to hold down relationships. She hadn't found that guy that was going to be right for her, and so she'd gone through a few years of being single. And she said, the problem is not so much that I'm single, it's that because I'm single, I feel worthless. Her words, not mine. And with both of those people, I want to suggest to you, and I'm saying Christians aren't immune to making these errors, that when we invest in something as our source of identity, like a career or like relationships or whatever else it is, the problem is that when it's taken away, it's not just I've lost my job, I've lost part of me. Or if a relationship doesn't come through for me, it's not just a relationship and it's okay, one will come around the corner, or I might be okay with being single, that's okay. No, it's that I feel worthless because I don't have that thing. You see, whatever we put our identity in, it's got to be secure. But the things of this world, well, they fade. I was particularly gutted recently because my wife and I moved into a new flat, and I went to my jumpers after a bit to pull out my favorite jumper and held it up to the light, and it had holes in it. Moths had eaten away at it. And Jesus said that the treasure of this world is destroyed by moths and rust. It just corrodes. And that's not only true with physical things, that's true with conceptual things as well, like careers, like relationships. When they leave, then part of our identity is gone. That's the problem. It's far too insecure. Secondly, though, I wonder if one of the problems is that these things enslave us. Someone has said that success is a little bit like watching someone ride past you on a horse really fast. As you watch them go, you think, that looks exciting, I'd like to have a go at it. But the real experience is frightening and a substantial pain in the rear. I wonder if you found that. It may be, you see, one of the things, we arrive at Oxford, and I imagine the fact that you're here means that in your school or in your hometown, you were a kind of cultural achiever. You were probably the big fish in the small pond. And so when that happens, you kind of feel pretty good about yourself. Then you come to Oxford, and immediately you're looking around, you're thinking, whoa, this is a big pond, and there's lots of other big fish here, and where do I stand? Where do I stack up? And maybe, just maybe, you're lucky enough to be one of those ones who is top of the tree. You know, maybe you've got your scholar's gown, and you only wear it occasionally for formal hall, of course, and you kind of wander around with it, and it's nice to walk in. It freaks everyone else out, by the way, when you go into finals with it on, and you know that, but you enjoy that because it intimidates them a little bit. And ultimately, it is a zero-sum game, isn't it? Some have to rise to the top. Anyway. But you know, one of the things is when we do succeed at things, when we actually get our source of identity, I put it to you that it enslaves us. That's one of the great problems. There is a great danger of the thing that you build your identity on, if it's not taken away, that you actually, and you get to keep it, that it enslaves you. There's a writer called David Foster Wallace. He died in 2008. He's a brilliant American writer. And he was addressing a cohort of graduate students, and he gave a talk to them, and it's astonishing where he landed in the talk. He landed on this issue. He's not a Christian, but he landed on this issue of being enslaved to the things that you look to for your source of identity. Let me just read a small excerpt of that. This is what he wrote. Because here's something else that's true, he said. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship, and an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Jesus Christ or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess, or the Four Noble Truths, or some intangible set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, you will never have enough. Never feel that you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you in the ground. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified in myths, proverbs, cliches, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you will feel weak and afraid. You will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always fearing that you're on the verge of being found out. It's a penetrating analysis of the problem. What he's saying is that when we invest our all and our everything into something, which we need to do if we're going to have a source of identity, then that thing becomes our ultimate. And when it becomes our ultimate, the problem is it becomes our master, and we'll do anything for it. In fact, it becomes the lenses through which we view life. So if beauty is my all and everything, when I walk into a room, I don't just see a room. I don't just see people on their own merit. I'm looking around and saying, who is more beautiful in this room than me? And from where I stand at the moment, a lot of people. But as you look around, if you're looking around and saying, well, my intellect is my all and everything, that's my source of identity, you're saying, am I the most intelligent person in this room? How am I going to make sure that no one realizes that I'm not as intelligent as I project? You're always fighting, you're always evaluating, you're always enslaved to that thing. And it has to be because it's your all and it's your everything. You might call it identity, the Bible has another word for it. Idolatry. Means to worship anything else apart from God. And worship is not just something that religious people do. When you read the Bible on this, it's very nuanced. Worship is to look to anything else as your ultimate, as your source of value and worth and identity. That is the problem. It is too insecure, but even if you get it, it enslaves you. Notice that phrase that David Foster Wallace used. He talked about being eaten alive by those things. As if the thing that we long for comes back to haunt us. The Bible calls it idolatry. And the heart of our problem is not so much that we do wrong things, it's that we worship or look for our identity in wrong things. The first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. There's a reason it comes first. Because it's of first importance, both to God and also to us. All the other commandments flow from that. If we get our identity right, we get it all right. If we get our identity wrong, it all falls wrong. The whole edifice falls apart. Bob Dylan put it well. You may be an ambassador to England or France, you might like to gamble, you might like to dance, you may be the heavyweight champion of the world, you may be a socialite with a long string of pearls, but you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed, you're going to have to serve somebody. Again, Bob Dylan wasn't a Christian, but he says that everybody's got to serve somebody or something. That, I put it to you, is the inadequacy of looking to anything else as a source of identity. So let's then land on Jesus Christ and think and consider a moment in what way, if at all, he is unique as a source of identity. You see, we need an identity that's not insecure but is secure, that is not enslaving but is liberating. And in John 17 verse 3, Jesus says, "This is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." And eternal life in John's Gospel doesn't just mean a kind of ethereal existence to come in the future. It means the inbreaking of life from the world to come, life with God, experienced in the now, and ultimately fulfilled in the future. He says, this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ. And one of the reasons we have to construct our identity is that our identity was never made to be independent. You see, one of the interesting things is that we don't like the idea, even as I'm going to say to you, or something inside of you, oof, we're creatures, we're not the creator, and we don't like that, and yet that is our nature, and it's unusual in nature for anything else to strive against what it fundamentally is. You see, we are made to get our identity from the creator. If you like, we are his masterpiece, and in the same way that a masterpiece gets its beauty and its aesthetic from its relationship to the master, so we get our beauty and our aesthetic and our sense of identity from our relationship to the great artist, to God himself and his Son, Jesus Christ. Our identity is to be constituted in him because we're not independent. And there are various ways that this kind of bubbles up to the surface in philosophy and psychology. Carl Rogers, for example, who's very significant in psychology and found a lot of the kind of recent theories about psychology, talks of, in the counselling environment, that it's vital for patients or those who are undergoing therapy and counselling to feel unconditional, positive regard. What he means by that is that when in a counselling environment someone tells you something shocking about themselves, that actually you show an unconditional acceptance of them despite what they tell you, a positive regard for their self. And he says that's so important because as that comes in, then healing can start. Now, one of the things about a relationship with God is that he gives us what we really need. And he gives us that unconditional, positive regard. But it doesn't come to us the way we might expect. You see, the first way that it comes to us is by confrontation. And this is where it gets interesting. Because God, first of all, in order to give us our identity, must confront us about what our identity is really like. That is, who we really are. He doesn't pull his punches. It's not like he kind of sweeps it under the carpet and says, well, boys will be boys. No, he says, I first of all need to hold a mirror up to you and say, this is who you really are. And the place that God does that is at the cross of Jesus Christ. If you take nothing else away from this week, please know this, that the centre of Christianity is Jesus Christ. And the centre of Jesus Christ is his life, his death, and his resurrection, is his death, the cross. And the cross shows us who we really are. And it shows us that we're made in the image of God, precious, a masterpiece, glorious. And yet we are so morally flawed because of what the Bible calls sin, our moral failure before a perfect God. We've rejected God as the true source of our identity, that God has to send his Son into the world to die for us. It confronts us. It says, that's who you really are. If you like, the cross shows the moral consequences of seeking our identity outside of God. A guy called Mike Yaconelli, an American writer and theologian, puts it very perceptively, I think, in this quote. He says, because the pain of knowing who we are is so great, we spend a lifetime running from ourselves. We've become experts in dodging, avoiding, hiding, pretending, covering, running, protecting, eluding, escaping, averting, evading the real us. This great escape from ourselves is the way most of us has chosen to live our lives. Christian or not, because it is the way of less pain. That is why the good news of the gospel is so painful sometimes. Jesus wants to do more than just forgive our sins. He wants to capture our real self and for us to face who we are. Not only is our real self full of sin, it's full of flaws and brokenness and also full of hope. To see who we are meant to be, who we are capable of being, if we will stop running and start looking, is what conversion is all about. There's a confrontation. God confronts us and says, this is who you really are. And here's the question. If someone could see who you really are, warts and all, browser history and all, the most shameful things you've ever done, they knew it about you. And in that moment, they were able to offer you unconditional positive regard. Not despite those things, but even though they know those things about you. Wouldn't that give you an infinitely secure source of identity? Because they know the worst about you and they still love you anyway. And that is the message of the cross. This came home to me very powerfully in the film The Fisher King. The Fisher King's a brilliant film, it's slightly old now. There's a guy called Parry, he's a homeless guy. He's homeless because he saw his wife murdered and it sent him into great mental illness. And part of his the film is about his rehabilitation. Eventually he falls in love with a girl called Lydia. She's shy, she's awkward, she's dismissed at work and people don't really take any notice of her. But he goes on a date with her and he's been in love with her for some time. This is the conversation that takes place between the two of them as they're walking home. Lydia says to him, you don't have to say nice things to me. It's a bit old-fashioned considering what we're about to do. Harry says, what are we about to do? She says, you're walking me home. Yeah. I think you're a little attracted to me. Yeah. Well, you'll probably want to come upstairs for coffee. I don't like coffee. And we'll probably have a drink and talk and get to know each other a little bit better. Get comfortable and then you'll sleep over. And in the morning you'll be distant and you won't be able to stay for breakfast, maybe just as a cup of coffee. I don't drink coffee, remember? And then we'll exchange phone numbers and you'll leave and you'll never call and I'll go to work and I'll feel good for the first hour and then ever so slowly I'll turn into a piece of dirt. I don't know why I'm putting myself through this. It was really nice to meet you. Good night. And she runs off. Good night? Excuse me. Wait, hey, come back. Sorry. She said, no, I'm not feeling very well. Well, I'm not surprised you're not feeling well. We just met, made love and broke up all in the space of 30 seconds. And I don't remember having the first kiss, which I think is the best part. Lydia says, look, it was so very special to me. And I had such a wonderful time. It was me too, says Parry, but I think it's time you should shut up now. Shut up, please. I'm not coming up to your apartment, that's not my intention. Oh, you don't want to? No, I want to, it's a bit crude. I have a hard-on for you the size of Florida, but I don't want just one night. I have a confession I have to make. She says, you're married? No. You're divorced? No. You have a disease? No, please stop. I'm in love with you. And then he says, and not just tonight. I've known you for a long time. I know you come out from work at noon every day, you fight your way out that door, and you get pushed back in. And 3 seconds later you come back out again. I walk with you to lunch. And I know that it's a good day if you stop and get that romance novel at the bookstore. I know what you order. I know that on Wednesdays you go to the dim sum parlour. I know you get a jawbreaker before you go back to work. I know you hate your job, you don't have many friends. I know sometimes you feel a little uncoordinated, and you don't feel as wonderful as everybody else. And feeling alone and as separate as you feel you are, I love you. I love you, and I think you're the greatest thing since Spice Racks. And I would be knocked out several times if I could just have that first kiss. And I won't be distant. I'll come back in the morning, and I'll call you if you let me. But I still don't like coffee. And she reaches out to him and she touches his face and she says, you are real, are you? What would it be like if someone saw you, warts and all, and loved you anyway? That is what the cross is. Jesus Christ knows what you're like. He knows your fallenness, your frailty, your sin, and he loves you anyway. And the message of the cross is a call to form your identity on that and to turn away from forming your identity on anything else. As I close, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Christian thinker and objector to the Nazi regime, was thrown in prison, and over 18 months he had everything stripped away from him. He spent most of his time in solitary confinement. Eventually, he was hanged naked with everything stripped away. And a few months before he was hanged, he wrote a poem called Who Am I? And this is the last verse of that poem. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once, a hypocrite before others, and before myself a contemptible, woe-begone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army, fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, for I am thine. That's the invitation at the heart of Christianity. Thanks for listening.
Okay, great. We need to get on, so we'll start with the Q&A now. We've already met Pete. I'll just ask these other two guys to introduce themselves to us briefly.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I work with students at St Deb's Church.
Hi, I'm Peter, and I'm a minister in a church in Oxford, having studied a long time ago at the other place.
Thanks. Okay, cool. We'll start the Q&A. So can we please have the first question. I have not taken a German lesson in my life. How do we know that a dog isn't pondering its own Geworfenheit, is being thrust into being/identity?
Well, what you didn't know was that at the other place I trained as a vet. And let me tell you, until they see the vet, and when they come through the door, they have no anxiety in anticipation at all. So I think we can be pretty confident that there is no sense of inner angst in dogs.
Thank you. Let's have the next question. So how can we know that this eternal life and identity Jesus promises isn't as vacuous as the promises of success or beauty?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons for that. So first of all, I think the nature of the cross itself, because one of the problems with the things like beauty or success is they're always saying that you need to attain them, or you need to get them, you need to do something to have them. The difference with the cross is that the cross is saying to us, this is something gifted to you. And because it's given to you freely, not something you earn or achieve, it won't be taken away. The second thing is about the cross as well, I suppose, is that it's based on the promises of God. So God's nature is to make promises and to keep promises. And so actually, part of the reasons why we've got 66 books of the Bible is to show us that God is a God who makes promises and fulfills them in perfect detail. And he's never reneged on one of his promises. And so the promise of the cross is that actually he will give us steadfast love, is one of the phrases the Bible uses. That's unfading love, a love that never changes. And that he will always treat us on the basis of what happened at the cross, never on the basis of our own performance. So because he's a promise-making God, but also because the nature of the cross is something given to you that's not going to be taken away, rather than something you have to earn or achieve. I don't know if you want to follow up.
Great. Thanks. The next question. Do Christians ever feel like they have to justify their existence?
Do we ever feel like we do? Slightly different to should we? There might be times we question, like normal people question, why am I here? What is it all about? Where's my life heading? So of course all of those questions come in, and then it's where we look, as the whole talk has been, where we look to get the answers to that. Do I look at my feelings? Do I look at all the things that I'm tempted to justify my existence with? Family, education, beauty, purpose, goals, all those things. But when we look, Christians are simply those who ask the same questions but choose to go back to the Bible to justify their existence. And the Bible, the big sweep of the Bible is that we're made in the image of God. And if anyone gets to justify our existence, it's the Creator does, because He created us. And we have great worth and dignity because we're made to look like Him. And so He gets to tell us what our goals and purpose is, and what I should do when I feel awful about myself, what I should do when I feel joy, how to process all of that. And I distorted that image. It's really obvious to me, and it's obvious to anybody who knows me. I distorted that, that I've been made in the image of God, and He is setting that right. By changing me to become like Christ, who was the perfect image of God, the perfect representation of the God, and who never marred that image. And there's a verse in the Bible that says, when we see Jesus, because that's the promise of the Bible, He's coming back, we will be like Him. So the purpose of everything is I'm going to be made like what I was made to be again, fully like Jesus. And the cross is the key bit in the middle that joins those two existences.
Thank you. Next question. Is it okay for us to have at least some of our identity in the things we love or the relationships we're in, as long as we don't let them define us? Otherwise, won't we all be clones of one another?
Yeah, the key is, I think, what is at our fundamental root. If we are fundamentally rooted in God, then actually there are a whole constellation of other good things that may fit around that and not necessarily threaten that fundamental root. And indeed, those other things that we will enjoy as they were meant to be enjoyed. If there is no root, then that leaves, I think, human beings sort of hunting around for something and taking those other things that we enjoy and trying to build on them as if they function as a root for our identity. And we then don't even enjoy those things because of the thing what Pete said. They enslave us and they're insecure. And so actually the way to fully enjoy the good things of life is to make sure that there's a really solid core and root to our understanding of who we are. Then everything else actually does fit in. That's how I understand it anyway.
Thanks. Next question. Isn't having Jesus as a source of your identity just as dangerous? When you lose him, for whatever reason, wouldn't you lose yourself as well?
That's a very perceptive question. And I suppose the claim at the heart of Christianity, which the Bible goes to great pains to try to assure us of, that part of Christian assurance is very significant for the Christian life, is that we can't lose Christ in that way, because actually, ultimately, it doesn't depend on us laying hold of him, but on him laying hold of us. So, for example, Jesus says, my sheep know my voice, no one can snatch them from my hand. He's talking about himself as the good shepherd, the one who will protect his sheep from the wolves or other people who will try to come in. So our confidence is not in ourselves and our ability to cling on to him. Our confidence is in him and his will to cling on to us. And that's an infinite and a perfectly secure will. I think Andy touched on this in the first night when he looked at the calming of the storm. If Jesus is powerful enough to calm a storm with just a word, he's also powerful enough to hold on to you through the storms of life. It was something that Andy touched on. So our confidence is not in ourselves or in our faith. It's not about how much faith you have. It's about the object of faith, Jesus Christ, and his ability to hold on to us.
Great, thanks. We're going to have one final question, so make it a good one. How has your life changed since finding your identity in Christ?
I'll talk a little bit anecdotally on that. 14 years ago, I was here studying, and I wasn't a Christian. And I remember lots of key ways I was trying to form my identity. I was trying to form my identity on the basis of athletic performance, on the basis of rugby, on the basis of looks, which was quite difficult to do. And then when I left, practically one of the daily battles as being a Christian is to not fall back into those old ways. So I'm still tempted to form my identity on performance. I just make it performance in Christian ministry. I mean, it's so perverse, but it's because it's ingrained in our habits. I still try sometimes to drop in these things about it. It's quite nice when someone introduces you and tells you that you've got 3 blues because you think, there it is, I can drop into conversation now. But the battle is not to do that. It's actually say those things are insecure and enslave me. And so the daily battle and the joy of the Christian life is to say, Christ defines me, and to keep finding my identity in him. So, and that has given me a freedom to enjoy those good things for what they are, they're good things, but not to utilize them to define me. And that's given me a freedom for the last 13, 14 years, which has been wonderful, which is why I'm here doing what I do, hoping to try and plead with you to think about it, consider it yourself.
Briefly comment as well that people saying Jesus offers eternal life, and one of the ways he does that is by breaking into this life now. So there's purpose for the future as a Christian. You know where everything is heading. The challenge is to allow that to live in the light of that and to allow that to give you perspective when things are great and when things are not great. But Jesus breaks into this life now, and the claim is that we can know him now. And so for me, it's been a very gradual thing. My life is changing over time as I know him more. And the Apostle Paul talks about that he has all these good things that defined him, education and family and upbringing, even religion. But in comparison to knowing Jesus, he says, in comparison to that, they're almost like they're rubbish. In and of themselves, they're not rubbish, they're good things, but in comparison. And so I'm finding that the more I get to know Jesus, the more I'm seeing those are good things, but they're not comparable to knowing Jesus in this life and in life to come.
I went up to the other place not from a Christian family at all, not a Christian. I think I'd started to believe in God, but the whole of my first year I didn't do anything about it. Except actually I did come along to an event just like this with probably the most able apologist of his generation, or one of them, speaking. It made no difference to me at all. Sorry, people. But what did was that I started to feel more and more like I didn't have deep answers to life's questions. And I didn't particularly want to just pursue my relatively trivial ambitions, to be a country vet in my case, and ignore those fundamental issues about who I was. And that drove me, actually entirely on my own, without anyone else witnessing to me, to start to hunt for what I could base my life on. And I think my hope and my prayer, even if you walk out of here not being particularly impressed with any of us, is that you won't let go of that most important and fundamental issue for human beings. What foundation can I build a life worth living on? And it certainly led me to 30 years later sitting on a platform. I don't know where it'll lead you, but I do know it's the most important question that any of us can ask.
As I pass back, the cross changes our identity, so come back tonight for the cross.
Thanks, Sharon. And thank you all. I really appreciate that.